Hi, folks. Chris Voss here from the ChrisVossShow.com, the ChrisVossShow.com. Hey, we're coming here with another most exciting podcast. And of course, we have the best guests, which we have on today as well. But before we get to our guest, we want to thank you guys for tuning in to the Chris Voss Show. Please be sure to refer it to your family, friends, neighbors, dogs, cats. Pass it around to everyone, mistresses, your pool boy, whatever gets your thing off. Be sure to share with them and tell them to subscribe to the show. Anyway, they can go to youtube.com/Chris Voss, hit that bell notification button, or they can go to, of course, iTunes, Google Play, and subscribe there as well. Got a most excellent guest, of course, the best guest we have on the Chris Voss Show. She's a doctor, Dr. Diane Hamilton. She is an award-winning speaker, nationally syndicated radio host, a consultant, an author, an educator, and she's probably cool too, from what I understand. Her radio show, Take the Lead, showcases successful individuals, including C-suite executives, and through her work as the MBA program chair at the Forbes Business School. She has several other universities as well. She's taught more than 1,000 business courses, and she's the author of multiple books, one of which was required reading at Arizona University, entitled "It's Not You, It's Your Personality." That's probably something I should read. She created the Curiosity Code Index. We're going to talk to her about assessment that supports the work in her most recent book, Cracking the Curiosity Code. Welcome to the show, Diane. We certainly appreciate having you on.
Oh, I'm so excited to be here, Chris. Thank you.
I'm excited to have you on as well. You've got such a great history and resume and a beautiful website. Give us some plugs so people can take a look at your websites and shows, or your websites as we go through the show.
Well, it's my name. DrDianeHamilton.com is the main website. If you want to find out more about the book and the Curiosity Code Index, you could go to curiositycode.com. And on all the social media sites, I'm Dr. Diane Hamilton. So it's easy to find.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
And you're a PhD, if I understand that correctly, right?
That is correct. PhD in business.
I always ask that in front because if you weren't a PhD, I'd be like, does this look infected? No, I'm just kidding.
People still do that.
Do they really? Do they come up to you and they go, "Hey, I've been having this back problem with the ailment. Do you want? Can you look at it?" You're like, "I'm a PhD. I don't."
Yeah. No, I do. I was a pharmaceutical rep for a long time, so people do it because of that more than any other reason. They think you know something that you shouldn't, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, one of my pickup lines in a bar used to be that I was a doctor, but that's another story. We'll get into that another time. I don't know what that means. So anyway, give us a brief overview of you, about yourself, maybe some background, and what brought you here.
Well, like you, I have a show, and it's fun having a show because I get to interview just some of the most fascinating people in the world, and I use a lot of that information for the other stuff I do. I'm a consultant and a writer. As you mentioned, I've written several books, and but basically my background was in sales and just all different industries. I've done a lot of different things. I've reinvented myself a few times and used that to become a teacher later on. I never thought I'd get interested in teaching or even get a PhD. It surprised me because just to go to class was just not my favorite thing. I'm not a fan of lectures. But then I got so interested in online education that I wanted to teach it because I thought, well, how great is that? You don't have to go drive, park, listen to these lectures I never wanted to hear. I just wasn't interested in the whole traditional experience as much as I was into getting an education. So there's other people like me who liked that. So I thought, well, I'll do online education and focus on that for a while. And I really liked it. But I still do. I still teach a lot of courses. I teach for Forbes and a lot of other ones. And I love that. But I got interested in writing and doing my speaking and consulting so much that I didn't have as much time for teaching. So I use my show to meet interesting people and to share information with the world. That's kind of what I do in my teaching and my speaking. Everything's just kind of learning something and then just sharing what I've learned with other people. And that was what led to my books. And my most recent book was about curiosity because I'm a very curious person. And I had a lot of students who really weren't super curious. They were just happy kind of just going through the process of having you tell them how to do things without wanting to know why. And I met so many people on my show who were so opposite of that. They're just, I mean, I've had Steve Forbes and cool people, that are billionaires who've done really amazing things. And you kept, when you talk to people, you keep seeing I kept seeing, I should say, a thread of curiosity throughout everybody's background. They just wanted to know why and wanted to solve a problem, and they were just endlessly curious. And so I wanted to help other people become that.
It's interesting how some people are very curious about this world, and I find like a lot of my friends that are fairly successful in this space, writing books, of talking, speaking. They're very curious about life. They're curious about there's kind of that learning thing. And then, sometimes I find that there are a group of people that aren't really into the whole learning curiosity thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always kind of, I all my life, I've grown up looking at people and analyzing them and going, why did they do what they do? That's half the reason I do the show, is so that people can come on and we can have like a Larry King sort of discussion about who are you and why do you do what you do and what motivates you to do that. And that's very interesting to me, why people choose different things, different choices in their life, why they choose different choices. So, and I imagine you've got this book that's forthcoming, I guess, on curiosity.
Yep. And those are some of the things I looked into, because I think that my whole goal was to look at it in the workplace setting to make companies more productive, innovative, creative, engaged, and all the things that I speak about when I go out to talk to organizations. I mean, those are the top topics. Everybody wants to talk about emotional intelligence and soft skills and generational issues. And I talk about all those things. I mean, I wrote my dissertation on emotional intelligence, and I think it's all really important. But I think it all comes back, a lot of the things that they're trying to fix come back to curiosity and what holds people back. And so I started to look at, what was out there to measure curiosity and what wasn't out there. And there's some assessments that kind of will tell you if you're curious or not, or you kind of know if you're curious or not sometimes, but they don't really tell you what's holding you back. And that's what I wanted to know. Why aren't you? Well, like you said, some are, some aren't. And there really are four things. I had to learn factor analysis again, in which I have taken statistics so many times, and I wasn't thrilled with having to go back to that. But I found that there were really four factors that I was able to measure, and they were fear, assumptions, technology, and environment. And so those are really the four things, the buckets. So that people kind of have issues with that cause them to lack curiosity. So fear was obvious to me. I mean, a lot of people don't want to ask questions at work and then look like an idiot if they don't know the answer to something, or if they want to propose something like, let's do this, and then they get shot down, right? So people do have a lot of fears. But assumptions were a big one. They just assume maybe they're not going to be good at a job, or they're not interested in something because they weren't when they were a kid, or nobody's ever shown them that. So they make assumptions. And then technology, maybe they're not very good at it. They're afraid of it. They could overlap with fear, or that it does it for them. So they don't even question as why something happens the way it does, that they could go deeper into understanding things because of that. And then environment, which I think is a lot of a play in what you were talking about, people who seem more curious than others. A lot of times when you're a kid, if your family just didn't, show interest in certain areas, or your teachers were teaching to this subject only, and if you had a question, they directed you this way instead of that way. There's a lot of all those four factors that really impact whether you're going to be curious or not.
Yeah, I'm very curious, very interested to read your book and some of the things about it. From a very young age, I've always been interested in why people do things, and maybe it's because very early on, our family I was raised in a cult. And we had very strict religious dogma that was forced upon us, and because of it, maybe it was just born that way, because there's some people that just go, okay, sure, whatever you say. But I was just like, this dot doesn't connect to that dot over there, and this information you're giving me I can't make it work for me in the way that this has been given to me. And that's caused a pattern through all my life where I've I've said, why do people believe this? Why do people believe that? Why do people believe there's, you know, a God in the sky? Why do people believe there's blue aliens walking amongst us, or lizard people? There are people that believe that.
You don't believe that?
It's always made me go, why do people make these choices? What point did they turn the corner on, I'm going this way, and then they ran miles down that way and spent a lifetime believing in lizard people?
Well, I'm interested in those questions too. I mean, those are really interesting questions. And if you look at kids in kindergarten, about age 4, they're super curious, and then it starts to decline as they get older. And I think a lot of it can be environmental influences. And there's, you know, you think about the factors in your life of who've influenced you. I mean, maybe a teacher showed you this was interesting. You would have never gone that direction if they hadn't supported your interest. You know, you just don't know what exact moment it's that, you know, that one decision you make could just send you this way as compared to this way. And I don't know if it makes me find blue aliens or living among us, or
yeah, and those are like extreme examples. I mean, certain people use some things maybe more subtly in, like, say, politics or just decisions they make in their life. Like, they choose to believe that this thing is that thing. I mean, you know, I grew up, you know, as a child. My father owned a franchise back in the day. They would have franchises for this, where we would put the newspapers, the LA Times, in the coin boxes in LA. And so I grew up watching people who you know, were slumming on the street. They were homeless. They were, you know, usually laying there with a bag of booze. And I'd ask my father, I'd be like, why does he live that way and we live this way? Why does he sleep there and we don't? I used to ask my dad all sorts of questions, like, and so I don't know where that came from. From a very early age, I remember being very analytical or very questioning as to what the hell is this thing going on. And I don't think much of my family appreciated it, or my dad.
Yeah. But, well, you know, I think there's always certain personalities. I don't know if you have kids, but anybody who's had more than one kid, I'll tell you, I've had 2, and they're just completely different right from day one. You know what I mean? There's going to be some personality factors. I mean, I'm certified to give emotional intelligence tests and Myers-Briggs tests and all the different personality tests. And in any of the stuff that I've studied, certain personality traits are kind of like introvert, extrovert. Those kind of are kind of with you. I mean, it's kind of like right-handed, left-handed. It's more comfortable to write with your right hand if you're right-handed. You can write with your left hand. It's not your favorite thing to do, right? So personalities are kind of that way, that certain things are kind of with you from the beginning. But then other things you can adapt and grow, like emotional intelligence is something that can be developed. And
what's the definition of emotional intelligence? Mainly because I went to Betsy DeVos Public School, but give me an idea. So.
You know, there's a lot of different definitions. That's an interesting thing that I found out when I was writing about it for my dissertation, because there's different people who research it. I mean, a lot of people know Daniel Goleman's work because he's kind of the main name that you kept hearing about why IQ was maybe not as important as EQ from his book. And then I studied Reuven Bar-On and a couple other people, but basically it's understanding your own emotions and those in other people and then acting accordingly in a proper way. You know, I mean, there's a bunch of different ways to define it. But it's really having a strong awareness of yourself. But the different people who define it have different subcategories of emotional intelligence. Like some people include empathy, and then other people include stress tolerance. And it just depends on whose research you're looking at. So it can it can include a bunch of different things. But a lot of those fall into that soft skills category of like, can you behave yourself kind of category.
I think I've failed at emotion in my life. I think most people would say I'm emotionally retarded. That's probably
I kind of doubt that, but you know, there's so many people that get hired because of their hard skills, their abilities, their technical skills, and things like that. But then they're fired for their soft skills, or their inability to play nice. And
that's probably why I've been my own boss since 18, because I don't love others. That's probably
working virtually. Yeah.
So you've sat down with your book, you've studied curiosity, the aspects of it, you've come up with this an algorithm or index, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
so that I guess you give advice in the book on how people can maybe develop their curiosity better or have a good analyzation of where they're at and why it's important.
Yeah, I think it's really important for CEOs, HR professionals, consultants, anybody that's dealing with like emotional intelligence tests, any kind of personality assessments, any of the stuff that they're trying to do, maybe even, engagement surveys, all that kind of stuff. This is one more tool that I think that they really need, especially to be more innovative and productive in today's workplace. So in addition to the book, they can take the CCI, which is the Curiosity Code Index, and that'll give them their results of how they score in terms of fear, assumptions, technology, and environment, and it'll give them some feedback on the different aspects under each of those categories of like you need to consider this, consider that, and then they can create an action plan based on what they get back in their report. So the report's not that different than something you would get if you took an emotional intelligence test. They give you a similar kind of report back. That gives you pages and pages of this is how to get better, and this is what you could be working on. And then you work out a plan of how you want to, get to improve.
Yeah, I actually took that test, and it came back and said I needed a lobotomy. So
yeah,
sorry. It's like you can improve, but it's going to first take.
It's going to take
brain being removed from your forehead, which is probably better for society as a whole as it is. But I can attest to a lot of what you're saying about curiosity across my life. Not only growing up with dogma and other issues and the craziness of my childhood, and going, what is this about? Was me going into business and learning the same sort of things. And I don't know if it was Tom Peters' books on creating chaos or one of his other books where I learned to question everything, the power of why. I think the power of why came from Anthony Robbins' second book, Awaken the Giant Within. And I awakened the giant without, clearly. And he talked about the power of why, asking questions, asking why. And then I think there was another tie-in to that, but I learned to ask why. Why do we do things this way? Why has it always been done this way? There's the great analogy. One of my favorite stories is have you ever heard about the newlyweds and the turkey story?
No, I don't think I have.
This is a great story, and I'll tell you. There's a million different versions of it, but here's how I remember it. So one day, a couple gets married, and they're just a young couple, and she cooks the first Thanksgiving turkey, and she takes and goes to put it in the oven. She tears off the legs, tosses them in the garbage, throws the turkey in the oven, and the husband goes, "Why did you do that? Why did you throw away the thing?" She goes, "I don't know. That's the way I was taught. My mom always does it that way." And he's like, "That's crazy. That's the best part of the turkey." And she's like, "Oh, I don't know." So they call up the mom. They go, "Hey, Mom, why have you always cooked it that way? And why did you teach me to cook it that way?" The mom goes, "I don't know. My grandmother, or my mom, your grandmother, taught me to do that. I don't know. Let's call her." So they call up her, and up the chain it goes. Turns out the great grandmother is still alive. They call her up and they say, "Hey, great grandmother, why did you teach 4 generations of our children to rip the legs off the turkey and throw in the oven?" And she goes, "Well, back in my day, we had these small ovens because, it was, 1900s, whatever. And we didn't have enough room. And so that's what we did." And so for 4 generations, they had been doing things without anyone asking the question, why do we do it this way? And that happens a lot in business, as you know.
Oh yeah.
And people just, they like their little wheel of their little hamster wheel. They don't want anyone to move their cheese. And, when someone comes along and goes, "Why do we do it this way?" And they're like, "I don't know. The previous employee or the previous manager told me to do it this way, and his manager and yada, yada, yada."
Yeah.
And no one ever said, "Why does this make sense?" Or does it still make sense?
Yeah. And that's what happened to Blockbuster, right? Then Netflix asked why.
Blockbuster, Kodak.
Right.
The history is littered with the fallout from. from never asking why.
Yeah.
Or never accepting why, for that matter, when it comes to like companies like Kodak. I think at one point Blockbuster did have the option or the offer or the consideration to buy out Netflix, and they could have easily done it. Like $50 million or something. I don't know.
The things that make you go out. When you think back, you're just like, what was I thinking? And it's something that it's not just knowing to ask why. I think you got to know why you're not asking, because I think a lot of people know that whether that curiosity is good. And I think a lot of people, there's great books. I mean, we've listed so many of them. Simon Sinek. I mean, you think of Daniel Pink's Drive, just all the different books, and Carol Dweck's Mindset, and if you look at her work, and, it's some of it is how you're conditioned by how people, what they say to you when you're young. If they're telling you you work so hard to get somewhere, that's great. It's maybe better for you to have a growth mindset than if you just have a fixed mindset because somebody told you that you were lucky to be so smart, and then you don't think you have to try too hard, So I think that there's a lot of great research out there about curiosity and the importance of it. And everybody knows we want to be more curious. We want to develop all that, but nobody's really telling you how to do it. That's where I kept saying, okay, yeah, I know this is good. This is good. I want this, but how do I get it? And that's what I want.
And I think one of the aspects you have that is important is the fear base. People are afraid of failure. So they're afraid that if they ask questions, they might fail at it or find something they don't want to emotionally find. Is my husband cheating on me?
Yeah.
Some people are afraid to find out if they are. That's, there's plenty of examples of that in business. One of the things that really helped me in business was asking questions and not having a fear base to do it. In fact, one of the rules that I had at my business, one of the things we put into the environment of my companies over the years was I would impart to the employees, there is no dumb question in our offices. There are no dumb questions, though there were a few. But for the most part, there are no dumb questions. Please ask questions. If you have questions, be curious. And throughout my whole business history, anytime I had an employee that cost me a small fortune through some horrible error or mistake that they would make, it was because they'd missed something in the education process of us teaching them how to do their job. And they were too afraid to ask the question because they were afraid that they would be pointed out as dumb or talked down to, or be seen as maybe they just didn't pay attention during training. And it was always that person that would cost me the small fortune. And so I was constantly just going, please ask questions if you have, please be curious about. And one of my habits that I used to have to do when I would train people or I would make decisions as a judge on different things and why I would do things is I would usually explain to my employees the thinking behind it or the why. And so that way they could take away from that and go, okay, well, I understand why he has come to that conclusion or why that's important or why we do things the way we do. And also being open to people, being curious. I always wanted, I think it was the learning organization, I believe it was, and I forget who wrote it, The Fifth Dimension, the learning organization. But there was a lot of different books I read, and I wanted an organization that would learn, that would adapt, that would be curious and be interested. And that's a really hard thing to foment in a business.
It is. And it's not just asking questions. It's exploring opportunities. And, maybe you're not aligned well to what you're doing, and nobody's in both directions. And maybe leadership hasn't bothered asking you what you'd like to do. And maybe you don't know what you'd like to do. Maybe you're doing some job that's why, you got a third of the workplace engaged, right? So the other 2/3 are wanting to, shoot themselves every day because they're not really wanting to do what they're doing. So people, if you could be aligned to more responsibilities and tasks that fit with what you're really good at, it would be much better for engagement, right? And if they're spending 500, 600 billion a year on engagement, but if you're just not aligning people properly is part of it, and not asking people questions and not finding out I mean, not giving feedback, that's another thing. People aren't asking for feedback. They're afraid to, and you're not giving it because you're not thinking about that. There's so many aspects to this. It's so much more than just asking questions. It's trying to figure out just alignment of how people can be best utilized. And if people have these discussions, I want to open a dialogue, just like we did with engagement with this, the Gallup surveys, and you sit down with your boss and, this, what can we do, to make this better? And think of how much more productive. I was just on an interview just prior to this. We were talking about how much more productive people were who took extra vacation time, and and they actually saved money for the company because they took so much more vacation, which is, kind of what we think of as, not your normal thought with that. There's so many areas that people could explore in the work setting that could be, helpful to the bottom line. But nobody's exploring them because they don't really have that natural sense of curiosity because it's been squelched for so long, especially my generation. I mean, Mad Men was the way it was, and we weren't allowed to ask questions. It was like, forget it. You said anything, you just, you're cut off. Yeah. So it's, I think the millennials and younger really have a much more open mindset to that, which I think is great. And I think that, they're getting less of that I'm the boss, I'm above you mentality. They're getting more, flatter organizations where everybody's kind of team oriented. And I think you could get a lot more people set into really alignment with things that they're really good at because of that.
And some bosses stifle curiosity and input. I mean, I've certainly gone to people that I've worked with on projects and stuff and said, hey, here's some ideas that I have, and they're not within the scope of my job, but I think there's some really great ways I can improve this business, or here's some ideas I have. And they're just like, shut up and go back to your little, stay in your lane, stay in your lane there, buddy.
Yeah.
And it's like you say, it stifles curiosity because, years ago when I worked for another company when I was a kid, they made me an entrepreneur. This is back when the term was first coined. And I literally had carte blanche from the CEO to go anywhere in the corporation and change or improve anything. I had to run it by him, of course, before I made the changes, but he would let me tinker with stuff. So I could go in and I could be like, okay, so what if we do this? We could create little use cases and test things. And so that worked out really well for me, which was the preamble to me just leaving and starting my own business, which he knew, and which he funded actually. And so being able to wander across the whole corporation, just look at things and go, why do we do it that way? And they're like, oh, I don't know. No one's ever asked. We just have always done it this way. I'm like, well, wouldn't it make sense if we did it this way? And they're like, yeah, it would, but no one has the power. I'm like, well, I have the power to do that, so we're gonna do that. I used to have a great vice president and a great friend that were in a majority of our businesses back in the day, and he was really good at the rudimentary stuff where I could give him a process and he could run with it and just do it. Where I'm really bad at the repetitive, rudimentary stuff. I'm great at being a visionary. I'm great at coming up with things. I'm great at coming up with the processes to give to him. And I remember the incredible difference was as I go to him, I say, look, we need to solve some problems for the company. Sometimes we were having some sort of bleed out or some sort of process that used to work and stopped working and you had to fix it. And I say, look, here's a yellow pad. I'm taking the yellow pad home this weekend. Write down every idea you have. I'm going to write down every day I have. And let's come back on Monday and see what we do. He'd come back with an empty yellow pad like every fucking time. I'd be like, what did you do all weekend? And me, I got like pages of crap, and the one thing that's interesting about me too is somehow I overcame the ability to lock into what I think. Like I can even challenge my own processes that I built, and I'll go back and check those out. In fact, the company that I referenced earlier, I'll never forget the CEO. He sent me out one day to go do this process of functionality that just seemed like a stupid way to do things. But he goes, I want you to go do this. And here's how I want it built. And I want you to go do this and test it to see, test it. And so I said, okay, go out there and test it. So I went there and tested it. It was a huge failure. It didn't work. came back to him and said, look, here's what I did. We put all this work into it. Doesn't work. And he goes, that's great. Well, I just want to check and see if it still didn't work. And I went, what? And he goes, yeah, I just want to check and see if it still didn't work. And I go, so you've tried this before? And he goes, yeah, we tried it a couple of years ago. I want to see if the market had changed and if it will work now. But we knew it didn't work then, and clearly it doesn't work now. I'm like, you sent me on a suicide mission to thank you. But he's like, Chris, you're really good. He goes, if anybody could have probably made it work, I thought it would be you. But it's clearly just that concept doesn't work. And it was a real learning lesson for me.
Yeah.
I'm like, you sent me to double check something that you knew was a failure because you want to test it again to see if it was a failure. And of course, he was changing up some of the metrics of it by including me in it. But it was interesting to me that I call it the crazy Ivan process. If you remember from the Russian sub movie with I forget the gentleman's name, Red October, The Hunt for Red October.
Alec Baldwin.
And every now and then you do a crazy Ivan.
Yeah.
And so one of the things I learned in my business, I used to call it the crazy Ivan approach, is if I took off for a weekend or I went somewhere, I'd take a yellow pad with me. And I start looking at my business from the outside and be like, why do we do it this way? And I start challenging my own processes and ideas and concepts. And I start reaffirming them. And I call it the crazy Ivan approach, where every now and then, just for no reason at all, we turn the boat around and give a look at our tail and see if there's anything there.
Yeah.
And so, I wish I knew why some people were curious and some people weren't. But I imagine your book, you're going to break that down. We're going to find out more about that data.
Well, variables change, like you said. And your buddy, I wonder, with the yellow pad, I'm wondering, was fear a big factor of why he didn't include any solutions or ideas? Or, you know what I mean? How hard is it to come up with one thing to write on a yellow pad?
That's what I thought, but
it's probably not. It's just he doesn't want to put it out there because then he's vulnerable in his mind. You know what I mean?
And you would think after working with me for 13 years and 22 years as a friend, he would be like, well, this crazy idiot, I can do at least part of what he does. But
or he's thinking, how could I ever compete with this guy?
That's possible too. Maybe I was intimidating. Which I can
sounds like it might have been part of it. People get intimidated. They're thinking, I'm never going to come up with something as smart as this guy can come up with. Why even bother? He's going to have 2 pages. Are pretty
stupid, so I'm not sure why I think that. But you are right.
If you're showing up with 3 pages of great ideas, why would I give you one sentence that might be stupid? Is what he's probably thinking. You know what I mean?
And just being curiosity is really asking questions is so important in life and learning about life. I mean, my whole life has just been an adventure. That's one of the reasons I like the show, the podcast, because I get to have people on. I remember seeing Larry King years ago, and he goes, I genuinely am interested in people, why they are, how they got there, what makes them tick. Where did they get, how did they go from A to Z? How did they go from growing up here and now they're here? And why does that work for them? What did they learn? What are their stories? And to me, that's the real richness of life, the real fabric of stories when it really comes down to it. That's why we go see movies. That's why we go see TVs. That's why, and a lot of that reflects back on us. And I think we ask questions of ourselves. Like if we watch a movie and maybe it deals with some sort of, most movies deal or stories, if you will, of anything, really books, movies, TV, they deal with some sort of conflict and sometimes emotional or intellectual or both. And then how that gets resolved. And a lot of that we take internally and go, well, how do I feel? Where's my place in that thing? And so those stories just help us kind of learn. I think we all learn from stories when it comes down to it, being curious.
I think so, and I think, remember when Memento came out, everybody was like, oh, that was a cool movie because it was backwards. Because everybody thinks linearly, and you think this has to go this way or forward instead of backward. And they told that whole movie backward. And you just go, wait a minute, it's just something you just hadn't thought of doing. And I think that's appealing to people sometimes. Just in Hollywood, though, one person does it, and then everybody's got 8 more movies just like it, I like Seinfeld did it on his show, the backward version of that to mimic Memento. But it was funny but it was interesting because somebody thought well, what if we just did it this way, just differently?
Yeah.
And so that was such a hit. And I don't even think the movie would have been that great if you'd told it forward. But it was because it was backward, I think.
Maybe that's what they did. They go, this script really sucks.
Yeah, maybe we'll just tell it this way.
We'll do it backwards. I should do a podcast that way. I should do a podcast backwards.
We should take this one, just cut it, and then do it backwards and see what happens.
I know now what the other thing I was referencing earlier at the very beginning when I was saying some of the things that influenced me. One of the other things that influenced me was a gentleman by the name of Lou Tice. And he took me in. I've done videos on this course explaining his system. But he took me into this. We went to a seminar very early on, and I don't know if Lou is still around, but it made this impression on me that changed my whole life. And he said, I want you to take a piece of paper. Let me see if I can do this right. He said, I want you to take a piece of paper, and I want you to make a square of 9 dots. So you've got 3 on top, 3 in the middle, 3 in the bottom, and of course, if you turn it, it's always 3 top, 3 middle, 3 bottom. Kind of looks like what you would do for tic-tac-toe sort of square, if you can imagine.
Right.
And he says, what I want you to do is take and it looks like a square. And he goes, I want you to take a pen, and you're going to draw 4 straight lines without picking up your pen and connect all the dots. And so he gives this lesson to everybody who's in the seminar, and we're sitting there going, this isn't bloody possible. You can't pick up your pen, 4 straight lines, 9 dots. It's not working. And he says, well, how many people got it done? Everyone's like, no, it's not possible. He goes, this actually is. He goes, let me show you. And one of the ways that it's done is you go outside of the perceived box, because there is no box. It's just 9 dots. Right. But you go out of the perceived box, down and around, then you go out once again, and then you come back in. Voila, you can connect all 9 dots. And everyone's like, well, you can't do that. You went out of the box. And he goes, what box? There is no box.
Right.
You programmed yourself to believe that there was a box there. And you could not go out. He goes, did I tell you couldn't go outside the box? Well, no. Well, then why did you believe that?
Yeah, it's assumptions. That falls into the assumptions area.
Yeah.
Have you ever, I don't know if you have a watch on, but if you look at a watch, what would you say? I'm going to put it on a piece of paper. You tell me what you think the number 4 it would look like on a watch that has Roman numerals.
It would be IV, right?
Which one would you pick?
I can't see what you wrote on the pad.
Okay, so there's 4 lines or 1 V.
1 V.
Yeah, 1 V is what you would probably think, right?
Yeah.
Look at watches. Check it out.
I'll have to look at some watches.
Yeah, they're 4 lines.
Is it really 4 lines?
Take a look. I was like, you just assume that they're going to do it correct. What I thought was correct. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's assumptions that we all have about different things that you don't realize that it's in your mind. That's the only way it is, but it doesn't have to be that way. And I there's probably a million things like that you don't even notice every day. Like you're outside the box thinking, you've programmed yourself to thinking it has to be this way because that's the way it has been for me.
I mean, you should have seen the whole seminar was upset. They're like, but you went outside the box. And he's like, I didn't give you any rules other than that. And that was all I gave you. And you guys made up the rest and literally created your own box. You locked yourself in. And the smart people would be like, well, can we go outside the box? Or why can't we go outside the box? Or is there a box?
Right.
I've always heard people say I've had people say, the thing about working outside the box is that there is no box.
Yeah.
So there lies in your dichotomy. And I just asking questions, to me, I don't know, early on, I realized the real texture, the flavor of life is being curious and learning about life. And why do people do things? Why do people do that? My psychiatrist used to say, if it wasn't for the fact that you use the data that you collect and the things you count, for business, we'd probably have you committed, because I used to have really bad ADD. And before I got my own businesses, I studied business because I knew I wanted to be in business. So I would study it. And I'd say, why do they do that? Why is that billboard that? Why did they word it that way? Why did they say that? What does this business do? And so I was innately curious in collecting this data and this stuff. And I count things. I count like billboards. It'd be like, there's 10 billboards of this in the city. Even walking around my businesses or my companies, I would usually accurately know what my reports were going to look like at the end of the month just by wandering around, listening and learning. And for me, like I say, this show is the same, and most of my friends and people, and why do you do it this way? And it's really interesting to me, the dynamics of life and the complexities of so many people can have so many different things. Yet there are still the things that bind and connect us, and being curious to them.
Yeah, you mentioned some mental situations that I think was interesting to me in my research on curiosity. I've had a lot of people on my show who have had either dyslexia, or other things, and that have actually helped them be successful. There's so many. Jay Samit comes to mind. What a brilliant mind he has, and he's been, at Sony and all the top companies and done amazing things. I mean, there's so many successful leaders who they have a little bit of something not what we would want to say is perfect, right?
Well, they call ADHD the CEO's disease. I think there's a book actually called that.
I had a lot of that kind of thing when I would think a lot about when I remember taking algebra and as a kid, when they taught you how to reduce to the lowest form. I don't know if you remember on fractions, if you had 4/16 would be 1/4, for example. So every time I would look at a clock, if it was 4/16, I go, okay, that's a quarter. I'd start reducing things down to lowest form. And I got really good at algebra because of it. I don't know. Maybe
I should have had that advice when I was in algebra, because I was just like, I don't get this math. Like, how does it make me meet that girl across the room there in the thing?
Didn't work out for that.
Yeah, I totally did not get math, which is interesting, because later I became the accountant for all of our companies and can do math really well. I used to do math really well. The brain's fading in the old age, but it's interesting to me. Life is richer if you're curious. If you're curious, and you have curiosity, which I think is going to be a great aspect of your book, because I imagine you talk to people about how to learn maybe to be more curious based on testing and index that you have.
Yeah, I mean, I've had a lot of guests on my show. I've interviewed everybody from billionaires to Forbes 30 under 30s and different everything in the middle. And I ask people often on my show different questions about curiosity, and I incorporate some of the highlights in the book. So there's a lot of research from my show. There's a lot of research from, just because I'm a PhD, I like to research things, but I didn't want it to be scholarly and boring. I wanted it to be something that everybody could read. And so I took all the techie stuff and created it as a real interesting, to me, book to figure out the importance of curiosity, but also how those things, the fear, assumptions, technology, and environment work in, but also how they tie into leadership, engagement, and innovation, and all the things we're talking about. Because if you look at each person you're talking to, they're going to go, well, this is important to me for this reason, but somebody else, it's important to them for that reason. And there's a lot of different aspects to why curiosity is important. If you only look at it for engagement, or if you only look at it for, alignment for job satisfaction, there's so many other things that it's important for. So I want to make sure I had a real broad scope, because I think that it's so much more than just asking why, and so much more than letting people feel safe. You're going to have more innovation required of organizations now than ever. Just listen to Elon Musk or anybody right now, what they're talking about of what's coming out. And
Elon Musk's an amazing guy. He's just like, isn't he? He comes up with the concept, let's just bore under the city and just make tunnels.
Yeah, I was watching his interview. Did you watch that this week? His most recent one? It was great.
Yeah. Why not? Why can't a CEO of a major public company smoke pot on the Joe Rogan show?
Yeah, that was an interesting interview, though. I mean, I give Joe credit because he knows so much. To interview him, where do you go? I mean, you could just go anywhere in an interview with him. And I thought it was interesting that you could bore underneath the city and not cause problems with earthquakes. I mean, I was learning a thing I didn't know about from that. So I was glad to learn from Elon. But that kind of mind, I thought was fascinating when he asked him, well, how do you have all the time? How do you have time, to do all this stuff? And he's like, well, I just, I'm an engineer. I just do the engineering stuff. And to him, it seems so simple. It's not that time consuming. It's perspective. There's so much perspective involved. And I meet so many people who just close themselves down to things for fear, because their perspective is it's going to be just too difficult, too hard, too much work, time consuming, too whatever it is. And he just jumps in and says, well, I'm just going to figure it out. He's a just do it Nike kind of guy. And I like that mentality. And I want to get more people less worried about what happens if it doesn't work and more interested in, well, what can we find out from this?
And what's interesting about me is, even though I asked a lot of questions and I was a big people watcher as a kid, I was still an introvert, largely introvert, which is hard to imagine now. But back then I was a horrible introvert. I was really introverted. But I was a people watcher, and I would ask questions and try and analyze people. And so somehow I overcame that and became more of, I used to be the person who would get on a plane and I wouldn't talk to anybody. And you stand on the elevator and do that elevator thing. Like, let's pretend like this isn't weird. But now I'm the sort of person, well, I get on the plane and I'll actually be the person who pisses off the introvert, and I'll, start digging and get stuff out of them. And pretty much after a while, I've got 2 rows of people laughing and free drinks for everybody from the airline stewardess, and we're all having a good time. And I find these, it's just always interesting to me, like, because I know my path, but I look at other people's paths, or I get to know their past and dig it out of them, and then I go, wow, that's really cool. I had no idea that was that whole thing. I had no idea that you could, become a millionaire. I don't know, working as a garbage disposal person or whatever.
Yeah.
One of the reasons you're on the show is because I kept seeing the Facebook suggestion of you is because you're friends of my friends. And finally, I'm just like, who is this person? Like, I keep seeing them.
God, would you just go away?
I keep seeing your stupid tweets. Who are you? And then I looked at you and I got curious and I said, oh, okay, she's a writer, speaker. Okay, let's, she's got a professional website. She's a professional person. Be a great person to have on the podcast. And it's interesting to me. I'll be interested to read the book. I'll be very curious, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
The irony of the book. One of my other, I don't know. You know what you should do for your next book? You should do your next book, Why Do Curious People Attract People That Aren't Very Curious and Very Boring? I mean, it doesn't always happen to me. I've got great friends now, but I really have to work hard to make sure that the friends that I have, and probably the friends you and I share on Facebook, are really interesting and cool people. Unfortunately, I've gotten to this kind of clique or club of people where we're all, book writers, speaker writers, all that sort of stuff. And we're innately curious. But like my old business partner, no matter what I could do, I could not get the curious gem out of him. It hasn't been the same with all my girlfriends, but I remember a girlfriend years ago. She's a wonderful person, and I'm certainly not talking down about her in any way, but she just wasn't curious like I was. Mm-hmm. And I could go to work every day, and we had 100+ employees. So I could come home every day with some new story, and I'd be like, hey, honey, you got to hear this story. You can't believe what happened today. In fact, usually I had too many. And so I tell my story, and then I'd be like, what happened at your work? And she was a great gal. She worked as a manager of Delta Airlines, and she managed the flight attendants there. Mm-hmm. And so when everyone would call in sick, she'd have to go fly out and cover their jobs. And so she would spend her day, and I was kind of jealous, in like 2 or 3 different cities, hotels, she's aboard a boatload of planes with hundreds of people on them. And I can't imagine, what sort of experience I get off that with my curiosity and my like going, what? And And she would come home and, I'd tell my story and I'd be like, so what happened to your day? And she'd be like, nothing.
Yeah.
And you're like, wait, you went to 3 different cities and nothing? Like nothing. Like nothing. Like you didn't walk by something and go, that's interesting. What is that? And so it
maybe didn't see what you would
people are like that. Yeah. Some people aren't.
Yeah. It is. I mean, I get really bored by that type of a setting if people don't want to share. I love the great story, I was raised in a family that was what we did. We played school at the dinner table at night, and if in a fun way. And if you you missed a question, I think you were a third of a hippopotamus or something crazy my dad made up. And everything was fun. Everything was a game. No matter what we did, if we watched the Kentucky Derby, we all had to bet on the horse. If we watched Miss America, we all had to bet. Everything was a game, and everything was, you were waiting to see the outcomes. And I think he instilled a lot of curiosity in me because he was born blind, so he couldn't do a lot of things. He had 2% vision. Wow. And so he really couldn't do a lot of things, but he really wanted to do a lot of things. And it kind of rubbed off on me, I think, a lot of that. But it's interesting. There's a lot of people, I dated people like your ex, where they. And
I'm just not, just not people you date, but I've come across in that business. But I remember the extreme essence of that relationship of a year and a half. And I remember saying to her, I'm pretty sure I said it to her, but I remember thinking it for like just most of the last 6 months of the relationship. And I remember looking at her just every time she'd be like, I don't have a story. And I'd be like, can you come up with anything?
Lie to me. Make up something.
Make up some. Tell me, lie to me, for Christ's sake.
Yeah.
And I remember starting to think, you know what? And I'm pretty sure I told her, I go, you know what? I wish that someone would kidnap you one day and just take you for like a day, and they wouldn't hurt you or anything, but they just take you and hold you for ransom or something, and then release you. And then you would have like a really great story to tell me about what that was like.
Maybe she'd come back and go, not much.
I think I even thought about paying for someone to kidnap. Like I could do like that. What was that one show with Michael Douglas where his brother pays for the for him to go through that weird experience so he can go through his catharsis.
I haven't seen it in a long time. I can't think of it. I know.
You know the movie I'm talking about. So yeah, I mean, there's,
well, it's just different perceptions. You know what I mean? You could have the same experience and two people will see it completely differently.
Exactly. That's a good
You're
analogy.
Looking for the good story and things, and so am I. And I think that makes you an interesting person. For me, it does. I mean, I love the life of the party people. You have parties. You go like, oh, it's going to be all these people. We need to have somebody come in that's one of these people. You want the interesting, exciting people sometimes. You can't have everybody be that way, or you're going to drain. Everybody will be just like all on at the same time. But it's something that I think that a lot of people could develop. I mean, there's introverts of the world. We need them. I mean, Susan Cain's book was an amazing book. I loved it, and I think her work is incredible. And it shows that you can still be curious and be an introvert. Not everybody has to be, spilling their guts about everything. Like, I'm going to be much more extroverted. I'm like you. I was not as extroverted as a child. I was much more introverted, taking things in, and I think that you can change a little bit in some aspects as you get older, but every job is going to require a different skill set. Yeah. And so, but the question is, what can you ask and what can you learn from every personality type, from everybody out there? And it's all going to be different. But if you just close it down where people don't feel safe to explore the different aspects of what they're good at or what they could be good at, that's where there's a problem, I think, and that's what I'm trying to get away from. And
it's great for corporations too. I mean, if you can teach to have learning corporations where employees and people in management can be curious, can explore different things, it makes all the difference. Steve Jobs for a long time was really resistant to doing a phone. He didn't like the idea initially. And somehow they got curious and started working on it, and then doors opened.
Yeah.
Just being able to have, like I say, having an office environment for my companies where the only stupid question is the unasked question. That's what we used to say. The only stupid question is the unasked question. because that's the one that will get me. Is the one that never gets asked.
It's
Some
so important.
employee will do some blunder, and $10,000 later, you're like, I wish you would have asked me that thing. And I'm like, well, I was afraid to. And you're like,
Well,
your
in the past, when I asked that, this happened,
Yeah.
And that's why I work with a lot of consultants. I think a consultant is a really good person for this curiosity assessment to be very familiar with, because you go into these organizations to help people with leadership issues, right? And so a lot of them are giving them emotional intelligence training or DISC training or whatever they're doing. This is just another huge thing to put in their arsenal of what they can help people achieve in the organization, because I think we've tried to get to different things by different ways. We work on engagement, we work on soft skills, we work on emotional intelligence, but I really think that just knowing that I'm a D as a DISC person, or knowing that I'm a ESTJ as a Myers-Briggs person, all that stuff's really good because I know what I am, but not so much knowing what I am. I understand what other people are when I go through that training, and so I understand that they need information in this way and that way. So I really like that kind of training, but I think this goes one step past that. Now that we know who we are and what we like, how can we go beyond that and ask questions and feel safe and then get productive? Just knowing that I'm an introvert is not going to make me be more productive necessarily, but knowing the kind of things, the ways that introverts can ask questions in a safe way, maybe give them more time to develop their questions before a meeting. Maybe say to an introvert, introvert likes to think ahead of time. They don't want to be put on the spot. Like, this puts you on the spot. This isn't great for an introvert, right? But if you say, I'm going to ask you these questions when I talk to you, have some good ideas or questions, suggestions based on that. You're preparing them, and you're working around their personality type and their preferences. And same with the different personality assessments. Say you use management by strengths or one of the color tests. If you and I are green because we're extroverts, and somebody else over here is a yellow because they like to read spreadsheets, you're not going to interact with me the same way, right? And with the spreadsheet guy, you're going to show them data in different ways. And so you have to understand personality assessment. That's why I wrote the book, It's Not You, It's Your Personality, because I thought all the assessments were really important. But with this book, I think it's really the more important step of, we know who we are now, but how are we going to make things better based on letting us explore and become really more aligned with what we really are interested in?
And I think it does better for corporations on employee fulfillment, employee retention, probably. If employees can feel like they can contribute more. I recently had Kathleen Hessert of wearegenx.com, and she was on with one of her 1,000-member think tank teens, and we were talking about the Gen X generation, and they're a very curious generation. They're a very why generation. Like, for employers to engage with them or brands to engage with them, there has to be a why factor that they need to answer for this new generation. And as these people flood into the employment pools of these corporations are going to have to deal with these people that are innately curious, that they want to know why. They need to establish that as a reason for what they're doing. And so definitely for employee retention and everything else, understanding curiosity, what it's about, where this new generation is coming from, should be impactful.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think that that's why probably you and I do this job, the same kind of job, because we like to be around people who are curious, and you get to find out amazing things. You meet people you'd never have met otherwise. You and I would have never met otherwise. And there's so much to explore. And I think that this has been one of the more challenging things that I've had to do to create especially the assessment, because it's really so unique. There's just nothing like it out there. And I think that if we can work on improving this, we're going to have so much more opportunities to succeed, because it's going to be so competitive. I'm really anxious to see what innovation brings in the next decade, because think of what the last decade brought. And it's just, to me, I was always a Star Trek fan and a Jetsons fan and all the stuff, and I want to see what's coming next. So I'm kind of excited for all.
That will definitely be nice. The curiosity is to me the real fabric of life. Throughout my life, I've been single. I don't have kids, but I've always been on my adventures, and I've always been so busy with them usually. But it's been interesting to me. I've gone and learned to try and master photography, or master this or master that, or do different things. And I'm always tinkering with different projects and hobbies and stuff. And to me, that's the real fabric of life. And that's what I learned when I was an introvert, was the real richness of it, was the curiosity of it, why people do things, how they do it. What is this? How does it impact me and internalize with me and make a difference in my life? You know, I joked in the pre-show with you about how one of the reasons I like this show is I get to bring people on like yourself that are interesting to me, especially because I'm sick of me. I know everything about me. I've had it with this whole me thing. So I'd rather have someone like you come on the show and go, hey, here's some cool and some interesting. And so me being able to be curious and have people on the show, and I'm sure my audience is the same way, like, yeah, we're sick of his crap too. So it's great he got a good guest on.
Who's the most interesting guest that you've had on? I mean, was there somebody that stood out in your mind that you went, wow, I had no idea?
You know, I'm curious about everybody, and why people tick and how they make it. I'm not sure that any guest is better than any. There are some that are boring. Others? Like they don't come on, they don't share stories. They just go, here's one I know, and this one. And hopefully I'm a good guest, and I dig, and I get, because I'm curious, I dig, and I try and find out, you know, tell me more about this or that, and whatever. And to me, that's the fun part. That's the challenge of being where we're at. So, Diane, give me your plugs on where people can find you on the interwebs and get to know you better, if they're curious.
If they're curious, they can go to drdianehamilton.com. They can also, that's DRDIANEHAMILTON. And they can also go to curiositycode.com to find out when the book and the CCI assessment will be coming out. And we're hopefully going to launch that towards the end of 2018. And the other sites, just Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, everything, it's Dr. Diane Hamilton. You can find me.
Cool. Well, we certainly appreciate having Dr. Diane Hamilton on the show. Be sure to watch for her book. Hopefully we'll maybe have her on when the book comes out, and I can take the test and we can find out how bad I fail.
No failing.
My high school, actually, when it comes down to it. So thanks to my audience for tuning in. We certainly appreciate you guys. You guys are most wonderful. And be sure to refer the show to your friends, neighbors, relatives. Go to iTunes, Google Play. You can also go to youtube.com/Chris Voss. Hit that bell notification button. That's real important, so you get all the notifications for everything we're doing on there. And of course, you can see all the great reviews we do on the Chris Voss Show and the Siberian Husky puppies. Those are always good to see on the show. In fact, that's the whole reason I tune in, is for the puppies when it comes down to it. So thanks to everyone for being here, and we'll see you next time.